Thank you, Vic. It's truly a pleasure to be asked to introduce Gary Grant today. Gary has served as Executive Director of the Concerned Citizens of Tillery, North Carolina, for 18 years. And in that position, in a rural community in the eastern part of the state, he has taken it upon himself to serve as an ambassador to people everywhere who are engaged in a struggle for better lives and healthier communities through social and economic justice. Because this is an academic presentation, I don't want to fail to note that Gary has a bachelor's degree from North Carolina Central University, and he also holds an honorary doctorate from Eastern North Carolina Theological Institute. Mr. Grant is without question the most inspiring and visionary person that I have ever known. His deep commitment to social justice, respect for humanity, and love of life is reflected in everything that he does. He is a diplomat, an activist, a preacher, a teacher, and a gifted facilitator. He maintains an astonishingly intense work schedule because of his belief in his community and his people, and because he recognizes the importance of making humor, art, music, and creativity a part of everyday life. Mr. Grant and his community-based organization have a long list of local, national, and international awards. These well-deserved honors, as well as accounts of Mr. Grant's leadership in struggles for civil rights, health care, black farmers, and environmental justice, are documented in scores of articles and broadcasts in the popular press. I won't enumerate these because they're not the really important things for you to know about Gary. What is important is to know that young people from all over the country come to what we call Tillery University, where they receive an education of the spirit, mind, and soul that is not available in school. What is important is to know that Gary's engagement in the labor of education reflects his love of people and hope for the future. What is important to know is that Gary's work for public health is propelled by his love of justice. He's an example for us because his understanding of public health is not constrained by disciplinary boundaries, but reflects a holistic and ecological vision that fuses food and agriculture, education and medical care, housing and economic development with democracy and human dignity. Under Mr. Grant's leadership, the Concerned Citizens of Tillery has become an internationally recognized force for positive social change. The struggle for self-determination, dignity, health care, racial and economic justice in one rural community through its necessary connections to regional, national, and global issues has become a symbol and an example for people in communities across the nation and the world. It is a pleasure to present to you Mr. Gary Grant.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Steve. You sit there and listen to things like that, and you wonder who they are talking about. I don't know if you have heard the joke where the father had passed and the mother and the son, they were having the funeral, and the minister was giving this glowing sermon of the accolades of this gentleman who had done so much for the community, and every time he would say something, the mother would get a little frown on her face, and the minister just kept going about how the hard work of this man, and the mother knew that this was not the man, so finally she leaned over to the son and said, "I think you'd better go check the casket because we might be at the wrong funeral." So we just want to make sure that we are at the right place here today. I thank you very much for the opportunity to come and be a presenter or a speaker or to open up this wonderful conference that you are about to attend. And listening to the introductions this morning at breakfast even made me appreciate how much more fortunate I am to be the speaker for you and I do appreciate that opportunity. And Steve, again, thank you very much. And I want to thank Matthew for bugging me to death about my technical pieces that I did not get to him in time because my schedule does not allow it all the time, and he's been very patient with me. And also Kathy Howell, who is an intern with us from East Carolina University, who has helped to do some statistical data for me. Southeast Halifax Environmental Reawakening and Environmental Justice. And just what is it that everyone keeps talking about? Environmental justice is the right of everyone to clean water, clean air, and a safe and healthy environment in which to live. It is the, quote, pursuit of equal justice and equal protection under the law for environmental status and regulations without discrimination based on race, ethnicity, and or socio-economic status. This applies to governmental actions at all levels, local, state, and federal, as well as private industry activities. There are three categories of environmental equity issues: procedural inequity, stacking boards and commissions with pro-business interests, holding hearings in remote locations to minimize public participation, and using English-only materials to communicate to non-English speaking people. The second area is geographical inequity. Some communities receive direct benefits, jobs, tax revenues, etc. Communities that usually host waste disposal facilities receive fewer economic benefits than communities that generate the waste. And the third is social inequity. Environmental decisions mirror the power arrangements of the larger society. Institutional racism and influence has influenced the siting of noxious facilities and allowed black communities and other communities of color and poor communities to become, quote, sacrifice zones. Let me tell you about the injustices where I come from, and in order to do that, I have to tell you about where it is that I do come from. I come from Halifax County, North Carolina, where African Americans are 52% of the population. Halifax County is the fourth poorest county in the state of North Carolina, and for those of you who are not from North Carolina, there are 100 counties in the state. 40% of the African American population lives in poverty. That doesn't talk about those who are poor, and we need to understand that there is a difference between being poor and being in poverty. 60% of the black children are raised in poverty. And Halifax County has the most, well, the dubious distinction right now of having the most households in North Carolina with below standard or no indoor plumbing. 17.5% of the homes currently are without proper plumbing and waste disposal. We're currently working with the State Department of Commerce and the Halifax County Health Department on a program, and the Resinol Institute on a program called STEP that is supposed to help remove or to improve the quality of indoor plumbing. Tillery, North Carolina, located in Halifax County, and I understand that sometimes you can't find us on the map. We've been called a little spot. We've been called many things, and some of them we won't name today. But Tillery, North Carolina is part of FDR's New Deal resettlement plan of the 1930s, where the government purchased some 18,000 acres of former plantation land and broke it up into 40 and 60 acre tracts, thus making it possible for African Americans to buy the 40 acres and the mule. And we never did get it, you know, under the first rule that we were going to do. And so they made it possible for us to purchase it, and it's seemingly 10 years after they made it possible for us to purchase it, they then started a routine that would ensure that they could get it back from us, and thus the decline of black land ownership. The population of Tillery, North Carolina, approximately 3,000 in a 10 to 12 mile radius, is 98% African American. Approximately 80% of the 3,000 residents are over the age of 60. primarily women, single mothers and grandmothers. Most of the farm jobs have disappeared and have been replaced with low-paying factory jobs that are 15 to 45 miles away from the community. Tillery is now 98% black, elderly, formerly farmers, and we are currently threatened with extinction. Like most black people in eastern North Carolina, we worked as sharecroppers, day laborers, and some of us had the opportunity to own land. We were and are the poorest and most marginalized group of people in the state, silenced by the legacy of slavery and the bitter injustice of Jim Crow. We have yet to realize the benefits of the civil rights movement that liberated all but us. The educational system in Halifax County consists of 4 systems. We have the Halifax County system, we have the Weldon City system, we have the Roanoke Rapids City system, and then we have what are known as the White Christian Academy system that sprang up in the early 1970s when the government said integrate the schools. We hold 2 distinctions. Halifax County and Weldon City systems are both over 90% African American. The Halifax County system has a 3% Native American population. The Roanoke Rapids City system has a 98% white population. Halifax County and Weldon City School Districts both are in the bottom 10 of the state rankings of 122 school systems. Roanoke Rapids is in the top 10 of the state's 122 systems. When we're talking about environmental justice, most of us think of environment as air, water, and land, that the environment is inclusive of our communities. And if you don't remember anything else that I say here today, that is what I would like for you to remember, is that it is air, water, land, and community. There is a constant struggle to keep a majority school board for the Halifax County and Weldon school systems, both in predominantly black voting districts. Halifax County School District has had 12 superintendents in the past since 1982. It is just now that we finally have gotten a superintendent who will serve 2 4-year terms in succession since 1994. Up until 1996, 2 of the white board members are incorporated that served on the county board are both incorporators of white Christian academies in Halifax County. They are elected in majority black voting districts. One of them still serves on the Board of Education. This white board member publicly stated that he is trying to, quote, change the complexion of the school board. He also tried to recruit black teachers to get the black superintendent fired. The former white school board chairperson that we removed in 1996 refused to allow citizens to address the board to speak to the issue of the board being deadlocked for 1.5 years because one of the black board members that was elected died 30 days before he was to take his seat, and to get an appointee or even an election to replace him, it took us 1.5 years. African-American land loss plays right into that. The struggle to bring the Halifax County School Board into the modern age is just one example of how white supremacy strangles our communities, a very real environmental justice that is still for those of us who live there. Another example involves the local former Farmers Home Administration, now known as the Farm Service Agency, and the Office of the United States Department of Agriculture, and which relates to the loss of African-American owned land. If you don't know, I am also the president of the Black Farmers and Agriculturalists Association that in August of 1997 filed a class action lawsuit against the United States Department of Agriculture for its racial discrimination in its lending policies and program delivery. And many of you have heard that that case has been settled. and it has, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, you need to ask the farmers if the case has been settled. $50,000 in no way will compensate people, farmers, for what they have lost during the span of approximately, well, the suit only covers 14 years, but we're looking at some 50 years. But you also need to know that in America, between 1978 and 1992, 57% of the land that was owned by black people was stolen, taken, whatever way you want to define it. We say that there was a conspiracy. In Halifax County and throughout the South, land is equal to power, and that is why Tillery has been so successful. You don't find 18,000 acres of land in the hands of black people in one spot too often across this country, when you no longer are dependent upon the powers that be for your food, your home, even your clothing. Black farmers are losing land still at the rate of 1,000 acres per day. The power and independence of black communities have been horribly compromised. Since its creation in the 1940s, Farmers Home Administration, through its local offices, have treated black and white farmers dramatically different with respect to loan policies. They place black farmers on supervised loans and white farmers on non-supervised loan. And a supervised loan means that your money is never put into your bank account. You are actually sharecropping with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So whenever you want money, you'd have to go back to the office to get that money, provided you had already gone somewhere and gotten a bill to repair your tractor. They offered white farmers lower loan interest rates than black farmers. Most of the black farmers received loans at the rate of 8 to 10%. White farmers received it at the rate of 1 to 5%. Black farmers in Halifax County lose land and home to foreclosures or bankruptcy. And as I said before, the recent consent decree that has been claimed to be settled, Pickford versus Glickman, is a long way from being settled. And on Friday, we filed an appeal to it based on the fact that the government, one, has a default clause in the consent decree, so the next administration can come in and say, we're going to reroute the dollars. It also does not include a guilty plea from the Department of Agriculture. They refused to admit that they had discriminated, even though we have all the documentation. They produced the documentation. Which leads us then to another area that's impacting the Tillery community, known as hogs. Piggies, that one that almost won an Oscar, first appearance, and black folk are still trying to win Oscars. I mean, this world is amazing. In all honesty, the historical, institutionalized white supremacy and racism that fuels the Halifax County School Board, the Farmers Home Administration, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture also fuels the corporate hog industry from our perspective. The explosion of corporate hog operations in North Carolina is an example of environmental injustice and racism. The impact of corporate hog invasion on rural North Carolina, and especially the African-American communities, they destroy the very social fabric of our community. We must also have you to understand that many of these so-called farms are being built on what was once black-owned land. It eliminates an opportunity for environmentally sound industry to come into your community or your area or your county. That other industries don't want to enter the communities that are constantly smelling of feces and urine from hog factories. Industry does not want to deal with the possible threat of contaminated ground and surface water contaminated systems. And also, industry does not locate where there are no sound educational systems. Thus, in Halifax County, we have the Roanoke Rapids city system, where the median in the Roanoke Rapids city, where the median income is about $30,000 a year. And when we put that with everybody else in the county, it averages us out to $19,000 to $20,000 a year. And when we take that away, for those of us who live outside of the city limits in rural Halifax County, our income is somewhere between $8,000 and $10,000 a year. And they told us that the hog industry was going to bring us economic development. We love that one. Economic development. Let me give you a couple of the myths, and we gave you a handout. Hog factories do not discharge waste into streams or rivers. Hog factories do not threaten neighbors' drinking wells. Odor from hog factories is not really that bad, and besides, there's no scientific basis supporting neighbors' claims of offensive odors. Has anybody been to the beach lately? In North Carolina, down 64? Okay. If you get a chance before you go. If you can't get that far, come to Tillery, all right? Environmental regulations are killing family farm jobs and causing the hog industry to lose money in North Carolina. Now, just remember how many jobs we lose, as we are losing 1,000 acres a day, and family farms are being replaced by corporate agriculture. People living in eastern North Carolina counties think hog factories are just fine the way they are. And hog factories are not disproportionately hurting low-income or black communities. We're going to show you a video here at this point called Pork Power, a 60 Minutes presentation that was done back in 1996. And I think I'm supposed to say video, please, or camera, or something like that. Marty? Is it Marty? Mm-hmm. Right. Marty? Did not work.
Tobacco, once the #1 crop in North Carolina, has now been replaced by something that's causing the state an even bigger headache: hogs. Right now, in North Carolina, there are more pigs than people. At any given moment, North Carolina houses 10 million hogs this way, in barns as large as football fields, on huge industrial farms. These are corporate hogs, bred, born, and raised in these indoor pens. Their future, just 165 days before the slaughter.
Excuse me.
This is more like the way Americans want to think of pigs. Pink, cute, and cuddly enough to be nominated for Academy Awards.
La 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 la.
Real-life babes see no sun in their limited lives, have no hay to lie on, no mud to roll in, and do not talk. The sows live in tiny cages, so narrow they can't even turn around. They live over metal grates, and their waste is pushed through slats beneath them and flushed into huge pits. It's the waste that's the problem. Pigs excrete 4 times as much waste as humans. It's turning North Carolina into one vast toilet.
The smell is so offensive that on the first whiff, you get a headache. I mean, just bam.
It's primarily ammonia that you notice. The hydrogen sulfide smells more like rotten eggs.
It also causes a lot of people to be nauseous, and some people actually vomit.
The stench comes from what the industry politely calls lagoons. Retired hog farmer Don Webb calls them something else.
Cesspools, not lagoons. A lagoon is something a beautiful girl in the South Sea Island swims in. A cesspool is something you put feces and urine in.
They call them lagoons.
But they're cesspools.
Cesspools or lagoons, they're just holding places for the 9.5 million tons of hog manure that's produced in North Carolina every year. There's real potential for damage when the manure is liquefied, then sprayed as fertilizer onto the company's fields. You talked about a caveman mentality. What do you mean?
The caveman, he used to go to the restroom inside the cave in a wooden bucket he carved. And when he got through with that bucket, he would go out the front of the cave if it was real cold and just chunk it and spray it all out. And that's the same thing they're doing now. They're just spraying feces and urine, except a whole lot more out.
So much manure that the fields of North Carolina can't absorb it all, and it's beginning to poison the groundwater and contaminate drinking wells. And there have been other problems. Lagoons have leaked and overflowed. Lagoon walls have broken, spilling out millions of gallons of hog manure and saturating fields even more. And where does all this hog dung end up? In the streams and rivers of North Carolina, creating a growth in green algae that has closed rivers for swimming and killed thousands upon thousands of fish. Don Webb got so mad when one hog operation threatened to build a factory near his place, he started his own watch hog group.
We're the cesspool of the United States. I mean, all you got to do is see a map somewhere and put a commode on North Carolina, and that's what you got. Uh-oh, they're going to be burying hogs right now. My God, this gobs of dead hogs.
Webb accuses the industry of reckless disregard of the law, of illegal dumping when it thinks no one is looking. He's always looking and finding dead animals simply dumped in open pits.
Look at the hogs dead out there, my God.
What possesses a grown man to go out and slog through that stuff and swamps and pick up water samples? And you got better things to do than that.
This is God's water. This is God's land, polluted like unbelievable. And this is going into public waters of North Carolina. And I heard all this stuff about, oh, you get used to the odor, we don't pollute, the cesspools don't leak. Well, you know, I had sense enough to know I didn't need a rocket scientist to tell me that cesspools would leak.
What is it that you find most offensive?
The disrespect. A good neighbor would never stink up his neighbor's home with feces and urine.
You cannot come into Tillery or into Halifax County and just on us and think that you're going to get away with it.
Gary Grant mobilized his neighbors when 7 hog farms were proposed for his community.
And they are saying that there will be 410 new farms built in North Carolina by the end of 1997.
His community of Tillery in Halifax County is poor, black, and rural. He says a prime target for hog expansion.
They can get away with it. Poor people are less prone to participate in voting. We call it the avenue of least resistance.
The thing that people need to remember is that these corporate hog farmers lied to us from day one.
Grant holds community meetings to reinforce resistance.
This is unfair to the people who have to worry about all the diseases might come in with all of this.
5 years ago, Halifax County got the strictest laws in the state passed. Tough rules about lagoons and groundwater monitoring systems. Too tough for many companies.
The industry will say, look, we're providing jobs here, we're increasing the tax base here.
Jobs, minimum wage, and those are all unskilled jobs. Washing out the pits inside where the animals are.
No such thing as a management job.
Well, not for us, of course not.
They're all dirty boots jobs.
They're all dirty boots jobs. All of the management comes from outside, leaves, doesn't have to live in the community.
What's been the response of the industry?
They don't like us.
Have there been threats?
Well, when we first started there, I would go home evenings and get on my answering machine, and there would be threats like, nigger, you're going to get killed, and all of that.
There is huge money at stake here, more than $1 billion. North Carolina has gone from the 7th largest pork producer in the country to the 2nd, with most of the hogs belonging to a few large corporations. It's replaced a declining, even dying industry, tobacco. And it's put the small hog farmer out of business. It's used science to produce millions of carbon copy pigs, high on pork, low on cost.
How do you call it farming when you have an assembly line producing animals, which is the same way that we produce automobiles?
I think this is industrial production. I don't even refer to it as farming.
Larry Cahoon is a scientist at the University of North Carolina at
I
Wilmington.
think that from start to finish, we have to consider this as an industry.
It's industry, therefore it produces industrial waste.
That's the way I view it, yes.
Hazardous industrial waste?
I would consider that waste to be hazardous.
As in what?
Germs, bacteria, viruses, such as flu virus, protozoans, various worm-type parasites.
The problem, says Cahoon, is that rural North Carolina depends on well water. The state toxicologist says 30% of the wells tested near hog farms are already contaminated.
Is there a potential love canal here?
It's slow moving, and it's not going to make the instant headlines that Love Canal made when the connection to toxic chemicals was established. but it's massive.
People can get in the hog business.
It's difficult to get anyone in authority to talk about it. Bob Ivy, general manager of one of the largest hog farms in the country, is the only corporate hog farmer who would be interviewed, but only under condition that we not mention the names of the companies he works with. He says the complaints about water pollution against his industry are all hogwash.
Annually, we have someone from the Department of Water Quality come and review the operation.
But an annual inspection, all an annual inspection usually announced means is that you have to be legal 1 out of 365 days of the year. You can be illegal for 364 days of the year.
Well, I'm happy that and proud to be associated with the industry that is in the forefront of trying to design systems and have programs and work with farmers to be good environmental stewards.
But in the last 3 years alone, 115 farms have been caught illegally dumping hog waste into waterways. A number of them intentionally, like this one. In one farm, there was a massive spill last year when the walls of an 8-acre lagoon collapsed, spewing out 25 million gallons of liquid manure into rivers, onto farms, and highways. Someone described it as being bigger than the Exxon Valdez spill up in Alaska.
Well, I disagree with that because I think the comparison is not accurate.
But that kind of spill was a disaster waiting to happen, was it not?
And I disagree. I think that the industry has operated for many, many years, and to my knowledge, this was the first spill of that particular kind.
Not quite true, as Rick Dove, the News Riverkeeper as he's known, will tell you. An environmental group hired him to monitor the waterways. He's dismayed by the effect of so much manure being poured into the rivers.
It looks like something like a green slime, something you might expect in a movie like The Creature from the Black Lagoon or something. It's just ugly.
Let me ask you 2 important questions.
Sure.
Would you swim in it, and would you eat fish taken out of it?
Right now, in this time of year in this river, I would not swim.
And what about crabs, fish?
No, I do not eat them right now.
Would you put your hand in that water?
This time of year, without a glove, I would not.
Why did it happen? Where was the legislature? Where were the county commissioners?
The county commissioners, the hog industry was smart enough to get to them real quick, and also the legislatures in North Carolina, most all of them have received money from the pork producers.
In fact, the largest pork producer in the world, Wendell Murphy, who owns this conglomerate, was a North Carolina state senator for 10 years, responsible for creating dozens of laws governing, some would say protecting, the pork industry. And the part owner of this farm is none other than North Carolina's U.S. Senator Locke Faircloth. He chairs a subcommittee on the environment. He also owns a $19 million stake in the hog business. And he'll talk to us about neither. That's pork politics and power in North Carolina.
So that's how well they are protected. It's like a sacred cow.
Sacred hog.
Like say it's a sacred hog is what it is. Yeah.
It's big time money. I mean, it's bigger than I realize. You know, you got some of the most powerful companies and corporations in the world involved in this thing, and it's been a real battle for middle class and poor grassroots people to fight these people, but we're not quitters.
And back in Tillery, the fight could be on again.
The officials do not wish to protect us as
Gary Grant's strict regulations might not be enough to keep an industry out that is looking to expand.
They're running out of space outside, and they figure they can live with the regulations. What are you going to do?
Then we'll go back and strengthen the regulations.
Are you saying, look, hog industry, we're giving you fair warning?
We will not allow you to come in and pollute our community and to kill off our people and to come in under the disguise of economic development and bringing destruction to us. We will not allow it.
And as Porky Pig would have said, that's all, folks, except it's not. The hog business and its malodorous byproducts are spreading. 4 of the nation's biggest companies have banded together to build a 2 million pig factory farm in Utah. And more are planned for Minnesota, Iowa, and Illinois to satisfy not just America's hunger for pork, but the world's.
Okay, so you know, talking about something like this is one thing, but for you to actually see so that you know what it is that we're talking about. Through one of the coalitions that we built, known as the North Carolina Hog Roundtable, one of our members wants us to get us patches that says we are Knights of the Roundtable with a little pork pig on it, I imagine. Successfully organized and did enough education that Mr. Faircloth is no longer chairing the environmental committee in Washington. Actually, he's no longer in Washington. He's at home now enjoying the smell of his pigs like the rest of us are. But let me share with you what the corporate hog industry has done to eastern North Carolina. My class this morning. Look at there. All right, and you have that also. Whoa, see, it's trembling. Uh-oh. Well, anyway, you have it there in front of you, okay? We have prepared this list of, is it something I didn't do right here? We don't know? Okay, anyway, we have it there. That the 15 top hog producing counties. If you did not get one, raise your hand so that we can. And what we looked at was the population, the poverty rate, the family income ranking in the state, and we recently added, thanks to Kathy Howell, the pig ratio per person in each county. 12 out of these 15 counties have African-American populations of at least 30%. 13 of the 15 have a 25% or higher African-American poverty rate. Now remember, in Halifax County, it's 40%. 14 out of the 15 counties rank in the bottom 50% of North Carolina's family income state ranking. And they tell us that this is bringing economic development into our community with minimum wage jobs, no health care, no education of the people who are going to be working inside in the confined growing and that are inhaling all of this stuff all day long, that will ultimately end up on public health and other public programs for their care. And then if you look at Sampson County, where there are, 38.95 pigs per person. Duplin, that has 1,000 pigs per square mile, gives you 55 pigs per person. That's a whole lot of pigs producing a whole lot of poop. And you know, as Don Webb talks about the lagoon, one of the things that, you know, that happens in this country is we allow ourselves to be duped by terminology. My people were put on ships in Africa and they were called Africans. And they were transported across the sea and they were called slaves. They moved from being called slaves and they finally got to be Negras, and finally got to be Negras, and eventually Negroes. And we were all talking about a word. Then we got to be colored, we got to be black, we got to be Afro-Americans. We were still looking for that continent. I don't know where that one came from, Afro-American. And we finally got to be African-Americans. And now, today, we're people of color. So, depending on which word you take, gives a different connotation. So if I say to you, lagoon, you sit there fine. We're on television somewhere. I can't say this, right? I'd love to say the 4-letter word, but this is a 4-letter word. If I say to you, a poop pit, you get a whole different perspective. And that is what we have to understand, is that we can dress it up any way that we choose to, but ultimately it is the same poop and it's going to smell the same whether it's in North Carolina or whether it's in Utah, okay? And that's what we need to understand. Remember, one of the myths was that it brought economic impact, economic growth to us. The other thing is that we must then maintain a low quality of education. That's why you need to understand the school systems, because you've got to have a workforce to go who's willing to go in there, okay? So we've had economic impact. Well, I got the rest of those up there. Yeah, just to show you that I can do this, we got all 15 counties up there, okay? And one more that we have there is the ranking percent of state total receipts. And you see Duplin had $746.4 million, or 9.7%. And I will wager you that life for those people in Duplin County has not improved, simply because the money is taken out of the community. We've had a decline in family farms. Nationally, the number of farms raising fewer than 100 head of hogs has dropped from 22,000 to 5,500. Hog production in North Carolina in 1994 was close to $12 million, nearly $12 billion, nearly double the 1991 figure from 1 year. The number of hogs produced in the state increased by 83% from 1985 to 1992. Do those years register with you? 1978 to 1992, the greatest number of black farmers, 57% of the black farmers were put out of business. Between 1985 and 1992, the hog industry grew by 83%. Okay? Industry representatives market large hog operations as economic development. Family farmers who are being suffocated by vertically integrated corporate hog operations have very little choice if they want to continue farming. And that is that they must become sharecroppers. They call them contract growers. Hear the difference? Yes. And one farmer said, and the difference is when we were real sharecroppers, the owner took most of the risk because it was his money that was out there and we were furnishing the labor. Now it is the sharecropper who is furnishing the money through, most of these farms cost at least anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million to get into the industry at this time. So everybody's farmland is mortgaged up to the hilt and you're starting all over again. The corporation takes very little financial risk. Halifax County has less than 30 hog producers, but in 1970, and we have the only intensive livestock ordinance in the state of North Carolina that prevented the industry from coming in, and it didn't tell them not to come. It simply said, if you're coming, you're going to do it right, okay? And even with that ordinance, we are producing 170,000 tons of hog poop a year. Environmental impact. One of the things that they continue to tell us is that these growing facilities are state-of-the-art. Well, we have this place in North Carolina called the Research Triangle Park, where all of the state-of-the-art industry is located. So why are the pigs being put in eastern North Carolina? It would certainly seem to me that they would be going to where all the other high-tech is, right? Yeah. These are just questions that community have. You know, we don't understand all the terminologies all the time. We know the difference between a lagoon and a cesspit, that's for sure. What are the cesspools doing? Most of them are dug beginning at about 9 feet deep. In Halifax County, we strike water at 7 feet. 90% of the county residents are still on well water. And you could just go into any county and that would be. We had a scientist that once told me that Gary, well, he said, Mr. Grant, you shouldn't worry about that. The pigs are no worse than the deer running through the forest. And I asked him when had he seen 25,000 deer running through the forest or 25,000 deer standing near a pond, you know. And he looks at me like, why would you think of that? You know, you aren't even supposed to be able to think. Our rural wells are old and are at depths beginning at about 12 to 15 feet. We did a survey in my community, and the average age of a well was 50 years old. We had no well ordinance up until 1996. So when it rains, you know, the water goes directly into. Most of the attention has been paid to surface water. Nobody wants to talk about groundwater, which is, you know, what's the real piece of that we have to deal with in our area. Well, you heard what I saw you writing those down, so I don't have to tell you what we can get in there, the nitrates and the phosphates from the fecal chloroform there, okay. Nitrates from hog waste contaminate drinking wells. 10% of the wells near large hog and chicken operations have abnormally high levels of nitrates in the drinking water. Nitrates have been measured at 10 to 50 parts per million in the groundwater below spray fields used by hog and chicken operations. The public health standard is 10 parts per million. High levels of nitrates are associated with the blue baby syndrome, a disease affecting the blood's ability to absorb oxygen. No groundwater monitoring is required of the hog operations to check the off-site migration of contaminated groundwater. So they tell us, well, we're just spraying on our land. You know, the water gets to the boundary on his land and it says, oh, we can't go any further. We shouldn't go over to the next person's land, right? The water says that, right? It knows when to stop flowing. In the summer of 1995, you saw the lagoon that burst there, the pit that burst, and it was big enough, they say, to drive an 18-wheeler through sideways, okay? So that's how big that was and how much water came out at one time. In 1998, a cesspool at one of Wendell Murphy's farms broke, spilling 1 million gallons of waste into the rivers in that area. Mr. Murphy's representative spokesman cited the burst and credited to environmental terrorist. New term. However, the cesspool had been cited just 3 days before and had been cited several times in the past year. But it was environmental terrorists who went out and dug something and made it burst, you know. 70% of the water flow in rivers of eastern North Carolina depends on groundwater. The history of hog operations in both Virginia and Nebraska indicate that 100% of all hog operations will intermittently discharge animal waste water into the surface waters. Halifax County was able to get an intensive livestock ordinance because the citizens of Tillery, North Carolina said, this is not economic development for us. But see, that's one advantage of growing up on the farm. You already knew how pigs smell, right? Okay. And then when you start multiplying that, you would understand how much more they were going to smell. So we galvanized our community to go and say, this is not what we want. And we credit our county commissioners with having the foresight to establish a collaborative, cooperative working group of those that they termed environmentalists, community representatives, the health department, county commissioners, pig growers, family farmers of pigs, cattle, and chicken, to design an ordinance that would allow people to farm in a safe and healthy way. And they do. And it's because we were able to do that. But our state has yet to form such a coalition of people to put together a policy that will allow farmers to operate and stop blaming each other. You know, the environmentalists are blaming the farmers are blaming the environmentalists, when ultimately it's the vertical integration and the continued confined siting of the growing facilities. The future of corporate hog operations, currently there is a hard-won moratorium on new and expanding facilities in North Carolina that they cannot construct anymore until July 1, 1999. This moratorium ends then, and we are working now to try to get it expanded at least until 2001. We asked for 2010, but you know how that is, right? They think we're crazy. The governor has now finally, who, by the way, was the college roommate of Wendell Murphy, is now talking about doing away with the lagoon system. He wants a 10-year phase-out plan. Now, it's been 10 years since we started telling them what was going to happen, and now they want another 10 years to close them out, so by that time, we might all be dead or so sick that it'll be requiring all of you all to, what the thing I heard this morning were that you were doing research to find out what. Come to the community sometime, we can already tell you that, we can save you that part. And then I heard somebody say that you were going to we hope that we're going to start finding solutions. So see, we can save you that problem. We can save you the research on finding out what, and then you can go directly to work on the solutions, okay? That would be a big advantage not only for the communities, but for you and your profession as well. The corporate hog operations, we need to have them released from being called agriculture and being designated the industry that they are. And we are still working on that. We got our moratorium, by the way, not from the citizens who have been protesting for the past 8 to 10 years. We got it because someone decided to build a hog farm next door to y'all know Pinehurst, North Carolina? The U.S. Open. This high-tech industry that they keep telling us is bringing economic development. But just as soon as someone wanted to put one next door to a golf course, whoa, it didn't happen. But no matter what, we still got the moratorium, and we've been able to keep it going. But we're talking about who is of concern. You with me? The people who visit or the people who live. We didn't get any real attention until that lagoon burst and messed up a few boats out on the river. You know, those luxury, yeah, that's when it did. Environmental racism and injustice. Environmental racism is when sites are chosen for hazardous waste and other polluting substances, landfills, smokestacks, and so-called hog farms because the residents are black and poor. In 1987, the United Church of Christ determined that communities with a high proportion of people of color and low-income residents get a larger share of the nation's poisons. Somebody this morning was talking about why is it that certain diseases are more prone for black people? I mean, look at what we got, okay? Again, the avenue of least resistance. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission in 1996 found that there was, quote, compelling evidence that the siting of a pollution-emitting facility in Homer, Louisiana, that would process uranium for the ultimate use in the nuclear power plants was based on race and economic deprivation of the area. Environmental racism is real. Environmental injustice is real. You need to understand that. Communities are real. Rural communities are very real. And senior citizens do not understand why they are being dumped on. Hogs have surpassed tobacco as North Carolina's top cash crop. Intensive livestock operations are constructed in communities of color with larger percentages of poor, elderly, and people of color populations. A recent study by Dr. Steve Wing at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, I got to do all of this just because it's formality, right? School of Public Health and the Concerned Citizens of Tillery documents the location of the hogs in North Carolina and shows a disproportionate number in the black communities. A rural health survey of 3 eastern North Carolina communities funded by the North Carolina Health Director's Office found community members complained more of respiratory problems, eye itching and watering, and indigestion or upset stomachs in the communities that were 2 miles from a large enclosed hog growing facility than in the community impacted by a cattle growing facility that was using a lagoon system and the community that had what is known as row crops where pesticides and all are being used. The results of both of these studies now have the pork industry in North Carolina threatening to sue Dr. Wing, the University of North Carolina, and anybody else that they can probably name. We all, and especially you, need to remember that the health departments and other health care institutions and universities and schools of public health are part of problems of social injustice. Racism at the Halifax County Health Department caused a white woman hired in 1996 as an environmental educator for the SHEER project to be called and referred to as the nigger lover. That's 3 years that the position is there. We don't use that word now. We're supposed to say the N word, right? Yeah, okay. The Purnell Park community, which is 100% African American, located just 2 blocks from the Halifax County Health Department and the historic district of the town of Halifax. You know, my county has the distinction also of being the first county to put into writing that we should separate from the mother country. Their motto is first in independence. You get it? That their motto is first in independence. We're still trying to get ours, okay? Anyway, and is right at the corner of the historic district of the town of Halifax, and has been denied annexation to the town because it is black, while the town annexes areas with fewer houses to no houses and run the sewer lines. The septic systems are failing in this community. Children literally play outdoors in their own urine and feces that comes up out of the ground, out of their septic systems. But because it would give the town a majority black population, the annexation always moves in another direction. Recently, a new company coming to Halifax County to produce recycled paper for industrial institutions has caused the Halifax County Commissioners to withhold funding from the concerned citizens of Tillery because we asked that it come protecting our health and environment. The company was planning to use a chlorine bleaching process which would produce dioxins that would go directly into the Roanoke River. The Roanoke River serves as a major supplemental food supply for many of the residents of that area because they fish to supplement their diet. Most of the fish that are caught are catfish. Catfish are bottom eaters. And the county says that we should be quiet and we should not be raising these kinds of issues. So to say to you that no matter what we do, no matter how much our international acclaim, we've been recognized even by our own local county health department as with the first rippling effect award because of our concern about bringing health care and protecting health. And now we are being penalized because we are saying there is a process and it ought to be used. By the way, the company now has agreed to change its process and it will not be using that. Achieving public health through social justice will require you to make decisions. Will you do research and practice for industry and government versus community-driven research? That's one of the reasons that we are so thankful that we found Dr. Wing. See, we already knew that the hog farms were in black communities, and every time we would say it, they said, "Where's your research to prove it?" Okay? So we found a researcher who would do the research that we needed done. Professionals who stay in the comfortable settings will not learn how to achieve public health through social justice. You got to get out of your offices. You will not know the conditions and the needs of the community suffering the worst public health conditions. We can review the literature all we want, but it's nothing like remembering the face that's in front of you today. You will not see the health casualties of racism and of injustice. You will not be able to construct research to help empower or re-empower communities to improve their own conditions. And one of the things that we do know in Tillery and that we have learned in Tillery is that if people have the knowledge, they will protect themselves. Okay? And so I say to you that if these hog factories are so state-of-the-art, let's take them to where all the state-of-the-art stuff is, out to the Research Triangle Park. And let me remind you of a poem that Langston Hughes wrote in 1931 on a train en route to North Carolina in response to the beating of a black Hampton University student by a white mob. And the poem is called Justice. And portions of that poem read, that justice is a blind goddess, is a thing to which we black are wise. Her bandages hides two festering sores that once perhaps were eyes. We in Tillery have not turned our backs on justice. We have begun the long process of healing by stripping away the bandages which camouflage the brutalized eyes of justice. We uncover acts of white supremacy and we refuse to accept them, whatever form they may come in. And now we ask you to do the same. Don't use your positions as healthcare providers and researchers to run from the pain of racism and struggles you experience in your own communities, some of which may be reminiscent of Tillery. But use your hard-fought education and positions to act locally while thinking globally. Your skills are priceless to the small, forgotten, isolated rural communities throughout rural North Carolina and throughout this nation. Our struggle is not a struggle against big business. It is a struggle against white supremacy, against the destruction of communities throughout the land, and against injustice everywhere. Perhaps the ultimate challenge for you is to come with us, join us in our struggle for our love of justice. And I will close with the poem that our poet laureate, we know that game too, the community poet laureate wrote. And it's entitled Ellis Island. And I use this poem to close because it brings to reality what black people ought to remember. I wear my Kenta strip if I'm not dressed in my rest of my African garb because I know who I am, and I know that I am the descendant of kings and queens, of scientists and mathematicians, of brain surgeons and heart surgeons and researchers. And it's all woven right here into this cloth. And I walk into meetings and black people look at me like, oh, here comes another radical, you know, because we don't know who we are. But let me tell you who we are. I didn't come by Ellis Island. I took a different route. I didn't gaze upon Ellis Island with hope leaping in my heart. In ship's darkness I was bound, and no commensuration was found. My possessions were not pressed into a worn satchel. Of possessions I had none. Stripped of all traces of home, my forlorn holocaust had just begun. Pain and subjugation were the only baggage I could claim. But in my heart, I carried salvation. And in coercion, I built a nation. I didn't come by Ellis Island. I brought Martin, Malcolm, and Gordon Parks, Robeson, Garvey, and Langston Hughes. I, Sojourner Truth and Nat Turner, Colin Powell and Spike Lee. I brought Magic, Brock, and Thurgood. All of these and more came with me. I didn't come by Ellis Island. I took a different route. Didn't see no Statue of Liberty. Sarah, Sonia, and Lady Day. And we add one more line. And we brought the black farmer, and we are all here to stay. Thank you, and God bless.
Okay, go ahead. Take some questions.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Grant, for your presentation. I really don't have any adjectives that I can use to describe it. We now have some time for questions and discussion. We welcome them from in our room here. I'm afraid we're not wired to the auditorium for questions, so at this point all you'll get to do is listen, but after the close of this session we'll step out to the courtyard for lunch, and I'm sure Mr. Grant will be happy to speak with any of you and take your questions there. Do we have any questions?
Mr. Grant, I'm just curious about your own marriage to the issues, particularly coming from such a poor community. You know how we tend to do, everyone talks about white flight, but we don't often talk about the black flight. And how is it that you have maintained such ownership of the issues?
I think that it really all has to do about being landowners. I really think that it has to do in growing up in rural America on a farm, having that connection to the soil, even though I'm the son that the father told if I didn't get an education I would probably starve to death. But it's just something that you connect with. I'm also, that community has been an activist community now. Remember, this is a community that's being built within a community that was already in existence. So there's been all of this struggle all the time. There's a dear friend who's now deceased by the name of Reverend Dr. Judson King, who at a historic black junior college called Franklinton Center, North Carolina, used to hold summer he called them work camps, but they were really empowerment camps where white children from the Midwest would come to spend 2 weeks, and black children from our area would spend those 2 weeks with them in a work camp. So we learned early on there were differences, but there were many similarities. I'm also a product of the civil rights movement, and we cannot deny what that did for many of us. And one of the problems is that we are dying, and I think that we have failed to teach our younger people of that same kind of connection that you are speaking of. So with all of that compiled, and when I returned home to teach after college, and I mean, seriously, I thought everybody had a bathroom because I had one. You know, that's just the way that we think. And you'd go into your classroom and children were coming with what we call the matter in their eyes, their fingernails were dirty, you know, and you're saying to them, if you just wash your face in the morning, your fingernails would get clean, right? Didn't know that they would have to heat water and go outdoors and get the water, you know. And we need to understand that. So as we learn, as I have learned all of that, my commitment simply has grown even more. I also think that I have a calling from God. The supreme being, a greater power than myself, who continues to, because with some of the stuff that I've done, I've never been shot at yet, but I've had guns in my faces, you know. But at the same time, that you know that the feeling of goodness and the feeling of rightness of what it is that you're doing. And as Dr. King said, if it's not worth dying for, it's not worth living for. Okay? Yes?
I am Iris Carlton Lene. I'm the person who's been selling your T-shirts at my family reunions and all over the state.
Thank you.
I'm also from Duplin County, and we still own our mom and dad's tobacco farm, which of course is no longer a tobacco farm, but we constantly get approached by people who want the land for corporate hog stuff. And it really causes a problem in lots of families where there's not a lot of money, where the land is just sitting there because we're not there to farm it and we're not going to farm it. Some of us, you know, feel our obligation to be good stewards, like our parents taught us, but it causes a lot of problems when you're being offered lots of money relative to nothing.
Okay, well, let me, one of the things that we had was, and we still refer to ourselves even in Tillery, North Carolina, is that we are land rich and cash poor. And what your family and the rest of us need to understand is that they are not making any more land. Okay? So, and there are ways to convert that land into productive money-making ventures without having to give up being good stewards. And if you'd like to have some further discussion about that, we'll be happy to talk with you about that. One of the big issues of the that we are having is air property. Is this next to the racial discrimination from the USDA? Air property is the next greatest cause of African Americans losing land because there's been the great disconnect. And if I say to you, black farmer, what is the image that you see? You know, we remember the barefoot, uneducated, unlearned, what we would term ignorant, one-shouldered overalls, dirty, you know. But if I say to you an agriculturalist, your whole perception changes. Again, the word thing. And we have not given these farmers the credit that they are due. They were mathematicians. They were meteorologists. They were doctors. They were veterinarians. They were teachers. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. And again, it's a matter of how we perceive it, how we do the defining. So if you'll see me afterwards, we can probably put you in contact with some people that can probably help you. Now, I am going to be honest with you about Duplin County having already been overrun by pigs. I'm not sure that anybody's going to want to, that falls into that category of who's going to want to put anything next to the stink. So it may end up. But I don't think you have to give up the land in order for that to take place. And the other thing that we must remember is that the cash will go away, but the land will stay. Okay. Yes?
I'm wondering if you could tell us as researchers, but also as citizens of North Carolina and other states, some actions that we can take to support concerned citizens and the larger movement that you're part of?
In North Carolina, what people can do right now is to write to their legislators and say that we call it the hog moratorium, needs to be extended. And that in the governor's plan for doing away with the cesspools, the first plan was going to require 90% tax dollars, which meant that the integrator is not paying anything. And the citizens should not have to clean up something that they told them was going to happen and that someone else has made the money off of. We propose that family farmers, true family farmers, should be able to have some assistance. But farms that are owned by corporate integrators, and they are just basically owned by them, should not be able to tap into that tax dollar. That right now is the biggest piece that we can do, because the legislature is scheduled to adjourn in July. So if we can just write to them and get the moratorium extended and not to use taxpayers' dollars to do the cleanup. The industry is, every time we say cleanup, what they pull out are all of the spills from municipalities. And we've got to also learn to make that connection, because at least the waste from none of it is good, but at least that one has been treated some, so it's not like what we're getting when the lagoons burst. Okay, thank you. And those folk from outside of North Carolina can write our legislature too. This is called vacation variety land. So if you're driving through North Carolina, you also get to smell, and you don't want to do that. Yes, sir.
When you say convert from lagoons or cesspools, how they can convert? What are they converting to? What are they going to do with all that poop, no matter what you call it, or where you put it?
Okay, well, I don't profess to be the technical expert on that. All I know is that there are other ways of disposing of the waste, of using it, even the methane to create electricity for right there, so that we talk a lot about the groundwater and the water, and very little has been talked about the stink, simply because they've now found a way to camouflage the stink. So they just have to put in sewage systems. I mean, that is what we are dealing with, is sewage. And I understand that there are 3 or 4 good prototypes that are out there that would allow that to happen. And if you give me your name and number, I can send you some information on them. Okay. Yes, sir.
I'm just curious. I'm sitting here listening to you, and I'm quite fascinated. I doff off my hat to you in terms of what you've been able to, get going in Halifax County. I'm just curious, how have you been able to mobilize people behind these issues and, really get them to become active in this whole cause? Because I think there are lessons in there that can be learned from a whole lot of other communities around the country. And I'm just wondering whether you can share a few of those.
One of the things that happens, and especially in communities, is that someone's always coming in telling us what it is that we want. Researchers, hello, or what we need. And I'm serious. And no one ever asks the community, what is it that you want? What is it that you need? And the one thing that we've been able to do is to take what people are asking for and use that as the vehicle to organize them, and at the same time to move them to another plane. The Concerned Citizens of Tillery was organized because the local school board, predominantly white school board, decided to close our community school. And we took that one issue, and we started with 7 people, and today we have over 300 families that are members of the organization. Someone came to us and said, well, it's time that we do something for the senior citizens. Fine, we have no problem. So we now have a group called the Open-Minded Seniors. And the most difficult thing that we had with them in moving them from just being senior citizens sitting on the front porch rocking away was to convince them that no one could take their Social Security check away from them. And once we achieve that, man, they are ready. You need to come to Tillery. Once they understood that nobody could bother with that check, they are the best activists that you can ever have, because they don't have to go to work. They don't have to worry about how they're going to pay their bills. They know how they're going to pay it. And at the same time, we provide what they needed. They needed health care. We brought health care from East Carolina University School of Medicine to our community. Not on a regular, well, it is on a regular basis, but once a month, the medical students and professors and medical doctors come down to the community. Started out just doing basic what do we call it? Give me my word. Help. Screening. Thank you. Doing screenings. And we are now up to doing maintenance of diabetes and hypertension. We had seniors who were, the pills, the doctor was telling them to take it 4 times a day. They were cutting them into 4 parts because they couldn't afford to buy the full prescription. We created a revolving loan fund because the children up south, y'all know who that is? Yeah. The children up south would send money in the middle of the month because they knew that the money would run out. So we can buy the whole prescription now, and when the children send you the money that you were going to buy the second part of it with, bring it back to us, and that way we're able to help somebody else. They didn't even know that there is a basic fee every time you have a prescription filled. So we were able to start saving them $10 to $12 a month just on those basic, on the basic prescriptions. So if you can give to people what they need, people have an allegiance. And that's one of the things that, no offense to my white brothers and sisters who are in here, that is one of the things that white folk have known about us for a long time. If we become dependent on it because you're going to feed me or whatever, so why is it that we are not doing the same things in our community? And that's basically what we are doing. And their issue, no matter how trite I might think it is a major issue and a major concern with them. And I have to give the same kind of credence to their issue as to what it is that I feel that they need to have. When we won the First International Healthcare Healthier Communities Award, we were in competition with 80 medical facilities in this nation and 7 foreign countries. And we were being judged by the World Health Organization. And the one thing that got us over was it was a community that went out and brought to the community what was needed, and no one bringing something in saying, this is what you need. The second place winner in that back in 1993 was a project by Kaiser Permanente Hospital in Valley Ho, California. So that tells you what kind of competition that we were in. But if you make people's issues the issue, and you can build in from that point whatever is needed. And I mean, it was just like when we told them hog farms are coming, they were going, boy, you better get out of my face, and all of us been raising hogs. But when you start showing them massive equipment digging holes in their community, and I mean, well, not holes, I mean, they're digging up whole fields, that once they began to see, they could then begin to connect. And that the animals were not going to be running around on the range is what we would call it. So it can be done if we listen to the community and let the community be part of the guiding. The community must be at the table, not after it's decided, but during the entire process. And again, we can go back to the intensive livestock ordinance that we have in the county. The reason it succeeded was we were all brought to the table, and we did it in 6 months. But you had everybody at the table. So you didn't have to go back and amend. You already had it there.
Let's just take one more.
One more? We got them all.
If you don't have one right now, that's good, because we're actually running a little late.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Was your hand up? Okay, all right.
Let me thank you again for coming. We'll now have a lunch outside in the courtyard. And if we can be back here at about 1:15 or 1:20, because we'll start at 1:30 sharp. And would you join me, please, in giving thanks once more to Mr. Gary Grant.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.